trying to set the linkage on the liftgate operator here, and it keeps kind of running me around because I realized that the actuator itself is kind of janky. So usually what happens is when you strike it closed, that's closed. And then when you open the handle, the linkage is going to be connected to this arm here, and it pulls it open. And as it pulls it open, that is supposed to flip up, but it's not flipping up. So when I was setting my linkage for this to open this up, it wasn't opening. I kept adjusting it and trying to get it to work, and it's not working, not knowing that this mechanism in here isn't functioning properly. I've ground off the top of, like, say, the factory rivet style or pressed end on here, and that's my zippy disc there. I'm just going to grind those heads off of there, and then those pins will be able to push out. But you also need to remove this piece here, and that's going to be a T15. So just remove this, grind those two off, and then we can separate this mechanism and open it up. Once you've removed your screw there, you just got to turn this until it lines up to come out. There's this little piece here that goes in there, and then you got to swivel it down to line up your hole. You might need a hammer and a punch just to separate that. I'll loosen those out of there, pretty tight fit, and then you just lift that off of there. These are the two pins here as they're sliding out and separating this middle portion from the end plate here. Here's our mechanism here, separated from the end plate there. Those are the two pins holding everything together. That's the top cover that we removed, and our switch in the back. So our switch comes in from the back, and then it's got that little plunger on the end right there. That's going to come in through that hole there. And if you can see that little spot there, that's where that's going to engage that sensor. So when this gets pushed down, that gets swiveled over, and then it's going to engage that switch. So we've closed it. And if we turn it like this, you can see that switch coming in from the back, and now you can see where it's going to depress that button in the switch there. And then it has that little bit of a ramp for it to ride on as it's being engaged. And we have a spring in here, so there's the tip of the spring, and it rides against here. It's going to be forcing that way all the time. Our little arm in here is going to engage this, and it's going to pull it back, and when it pulls it back, it releases that out this way. There's something missing because when you open this up, this isn't springing back open again. When we remove the cam out of the mechanism here, we're going to find that there's like a valley inside there. Maybe we can make that work to our benefit and put a spring in there, like a pin in a spring or something, to help retract that. I'm going to take this, I'm going to drill a hole in there, which is going to be the same size as that and same size as that. That's going to be a 19/64. And then I'm just going to cut that card in a shape here. And then that's how I'm going to try and find the location of that trench or that valley, and then I'm going to put that up against our cam so that I can know where to drill and put a pin in here. I've trimmed off a piece of this card here, and that was the piece that I've used. I ended up using a knife and some cutters to get my shape that I want. Put that in place there, slowly worked at it until I got my rough shape. And then now what I do is I use this template to transfer the marks on the back of our cam. This will be where the cam is for the open position, and then when you close the lift gate, this is going to swing around and lock. I decided to make my reference mark right there, and then as this swivels down, it's going to engage against the spring that I'd like to put in the slot here. Then I hope the spring will push on the pin and push it back to open it once it's released. I set it to the open position, and then I made my marks on there, and then I put it to the closed position and I made my marks. So here's the full rotation of opened and closed. I colored in all that section. I made my reference mark right there, and then I'm going to try and drill a hole in the center of that, so that will be where our pin goes, and then this pin will be going up against our spring right here. Now, if the first one doesn't work, what I could do is I could make another hole right here, and this would be the straight for the spring to engage that pin. So we're going to show you that we're going to lock our mechanism. That would be locked. We're going to hit this and release it, and then that should open. Now we'll take that out, show you what we've done. Here's the disassembly, and what I chose to do is use 1/4-inch bolts instead of those pins, and I'm kind of committed now because I've drilled those holes out right there. But you don't need to do that. You can reuse your old pins, and we had ground that flush with the metal, and all you would need to do then is just tack weld it back together. Use some compressed air right away so you're not going to melt this plastic portion inside here. So just tack weld those back together, compressed air, cool it down, you should be fine. Now if you want to go the same way as me and use these 1/4-inch bolts, what I found with the vernier mic'd out to 0.124. When I mic'd the bolt here, it was actually 1.245. So really all you need to do is you could just take your bolt, throw it in the drill press, and then just use a file. You're only removing like 5 thou. I suggest that you remove the material off of here rather than drill out the plastic, because when you take this apart, you'll see there's not very much material left on the other side there, and I don't think there's room for removing any more. First thing is this top piece comes off after you've removed your 2 bolts and your sensor that goes right there. And then now you have the center section, and the center section comes out. Now remember that the tang for this has to go in between in that space there, because when you pull on this lever, that's what's going to force that tang that way and release it. We just take this piece off of here. And now with that piece removed, you can see what I've done. So I just drilled that out at 1/8, and then I just put a roll pin in there. There you can see that roll pin. That's just pressed in there. On our slot here, what I've done is I've used some ball bearings and a spring. I was able to find this spring. If I could have found a larger spring, I would have put it in, but this is all I have to work with. That pin, you can choose where you want to put it in between these ball bearings to increase or decrease the tension of the spring. What I ended up doing was I went 3 in, and then that gives me enough that it's going to release it back. I've just put the screwdriver in there to show you the location that I've chosen when I assemble this. And then so when I'm assembling it, this is going to put some tension on that spring, just a little bit. When we go to lock it, it's going to crush up that spring, and then when we release, it will force it back. We've reassembled our cam in that position that I discussed, and now you take this and you're going to flip it upside down. This operator here is in that space, so it's going to grab that tang on there to release it when it needs to. Now you just take your cover, put your cover back on. Now that you've got your cover back on, you just simply put on your 2 bolts and assemble your sensor. We've got everything reassembled here with our 1/4-inch bolts right there. I'm going to use the Teflon locking nuts to hold it together. Now, if you needed to, you can take it apart, fix it, re-lubricate it. There's a couple things to consider here. First off, whether you want to lubricate this or not, probably a good idea to lubricate it, but it's catch-22 because that lubrication is going to attract dust and dirt, especially in this lift gate. It's a bad spot for that, so which means you're going to have to continue to lubricate it on a regular basis to keep it functional. When we want to disengage it back here with our arm, the other thing is if you're going to go with these bolts, or if you're going to tack weld, we don't want this too tight. If you make this too tight, it's not going to let that operate freely. It's going to bind up in there. Like I got these snug, but they're not really tight here. So that's another thing to think of when you reassemble this thing. When we install the latch into the lift gate here, we found that the bolt heads are creating a gap in here. That means that you should probably grind those down as much as you need to make that fit. And you're going to notice in here with that hole not lining up. After dealing with this problem, I would again suggest that you use the original pins and just tack weld those. Just be sure not to drill those holes out to 1/4 inch on the back plate like I did, because now I'm forced to use these bolts.